Welcome to episode 9 of the Psychological Safety series, where we explore how nurses, healthcare leaders, and professionals can foster environments of trust, open communication, and collaboration. This episode is hosted by James Carter, BSN, RN, an ICU nurse with frontline experience in high-pressure environments, and Emily Ramirez, MSN, RN, a nurse manager passionate about fostering open communication. Today's discussion is based on the article by Dr. Nicolas Abella, which focuses on how to encourage psychological safety in others, whether in the workplace, professional associations, or online communities. Have you ever wondered, how can I help others feel safe to share their ideas and concerns? What leadership behaviors foster a culture of trust? How can I create an environment where psychological safety thrives? Psychological safety is not a passive outcome, it is an active process that requires leadership at every level, from the bedside to the boardroom. Whether you are a nurse, healthcare leader, or member of a professional network, you have the power to create spaces where people feel heard, valued, and respected. In this episode, we will discuss common leadership pitfalls that undermine psychological safety, explore evidence-based leadership strategies, and provide real-world examples of how nurses and leaders can cultivate trust and engagement. By the end of this episode, you will walk away with practical tools to lead by example, foster open communication, and sustain a culture of psychological safety in any setting. Let's get started.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Healthcare Nurses Network podcast. We're diving into a topic that I think is so important for all of us, especially in nursing, and that's psychological safety.
Yeah, psychological safety is so crucial,
It
and
really is.
it can make such a big difference in your career,
Ugh.
and your well-being. It's,
And how you feel going into work every day,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
And it can really change, your whole perspective on your work.
Yeah, and it's more than just like feeling good vibes at work, you know?
Right. It's not just like being happy-go-lucky all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really about creating an environment where you feel safe to speak up. Whether you're questioning a medication order or, suggesting a new way to do a procedure or improve patient care.
So like, what does this actually
Yeah.
look like?
Yeah.
I think sometimes people get a little bit confused when we talk about psychological safety. Like, what does that look like on a busy hospital floor?
Right, and I think that's where it's really important to give some examples. So, imagine like a new grad, for instance, fresh out of nursing school, they're not quite sure about a procedure
Yeah.
in a psychologically safe environment. They feel confident, asking for clarification, even if it seems basic, without worrying about being judged.
Mm-hmm.
Or think about a near miss, where a medication error almost happened.
Right.
A nurse who feels psychologically safe, can report that near miss openly, allowing the team to learn from it and prevent a similar incident from happening in the future.
I think that's so powerful because it's really about shifting the focus, from blame to learning,
Absolutely. Yeah.
which I think can be so hard to do in healthcare because there is so much, pressure to be perfect.
Yeah, there's a lot of high stakes.
High stakes, and there's a fear of, making mistakes, and there's,
Yeah,
the repercussions of those mistakes.
definitely. And I think that's where the Letty framework can really come in handy.
Okay.
And I like to think of it as kind of like a toolkit
Okay.
for building psychological safety, both for yourself and your team.
So tell me more about this lead framework.
Yeah, so LED stands for Lead with Vulnerability and Transparency, establish inclusive communication norms, amplify learning instead of punishment, and design a culture of respect and psychological safety.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is.
But it sounds like a really good plan, and I'm excited to break it down.
Yeah.
But let's start with, leading with vulnerability and transparency.
Yeah.
I think that's a great place to start. It's easy to say,
Mm-hmm.
but how does this translate into action? Especially in a profession where we're expected to have all the answers.
Yeah. I mean, we put so much pressure on ourselves as nurses, right, to be perfect.
Yes.
But the truth is everyone makes mistakes.
Yeah.
And, leaders who are willing to admit their own mistakes create an environment where others feel safe to do the same.
It's like saying, hey, it's okay to be human,
Exactly.
which I think we sometimes forget.
Yeah.
That we're all just human,
Especially in a profession where you're dealing with people's lives.
right? Where the stakes are so high.
Yeah.
We want to We want to try to be perfect.
Yeah, and I think it's that pressure that can actually lead to more mistakes
Right.
because we're so afraid to admit when we don't know something or when we've made a mistake that we try to cover it up, and that's when things can really go wrong.
So it's almost like counterintuitive.
Exactly.
The more we try to be perfect, the more mistakes we're actually going
Yeah.
to make.
And I think it's about creating a culture where it's okay to not be perfect, to not have all the answers.
Right.
To be able to say, can you help me with this?
I love that.
And I think that's a really important part of psychological safety.
Yeah, and so like an example of this would be like, let's say a charge nurse messes up the scheduling.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to hide it, they could say like, hey, I messed this up.
Exactly.
What do we do to fix it for next time?
Yeah, and maybe even say, hey, I'm really sorry about this. This was my bad.
Yeah.
How can we prevent this from happening again?
Right.
Get some input from the team. I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, and it kind of creates that ripple effect of like,
Yes.
okay, like everyone can take a breath because we're all human and we all make mistakes.
Yeah.
So I love that. So vulnerability is key.
Yes.
But then how do we make sure that everyone on the team feels comfortable to speak up?
Right.
Because I think that's another thing.
Exactly.
Some people might be more vocal than others.
Yeah, and that's where establishing inclusive communication norms comes in.
Yeah.
So think of it as setting ground rules for respectful and productive dialogue.
Okay.
This could involve something as simple as, implementing round-robin discussions during team meetings.
Right.
To ensure that everyone's voice is heard.
So it's not just about having a meeting and saying like, okay, does anyone have anything to say?
Exactly.
It's about making sure that everyone feels safe to actually participate.
Yes, and it's not just about, giving everyone a chance to speak. It's also about how we respond to each other's ideas. Instead of shutting down an idea with a quick that won't work.
Yeah.
Maybe try saying something like, I see some potential challenges here.
Yeah.
How might we adjust this approach? Or, how can we...
It's about being constructive.
Yes, exactly.
And not just
critical.
Critical or negative.
Yeah, it's about creating a culture of constructive feedback where we build on each other's ideas rather than tearing them down.
Okay, so we're leading with vulnerability. We're establishing inclusive communication. What about when things do go wrong?
Right.
I mean, that's inevitable, right?
It is, yeah.
And that's where amplifying learning instead of punishment comes in.
Yes.
I feel like this is like a huge shift for nursing culture because,
it is.
For so long it's been this like blame culture.
Yes.
You make a mistake and you're punished and you're written up and you're
afraid
to speak up.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so imagine, a world where we shifted that focus to learning,
So instead of asking who messed up, we're asking what happened.
What can we learn from this?
Yeah, what can we learn from this? How can we prevent it from happening again?
I love that. But realistically, how do we make that shift happen?
Yeah, it's not easy.
It's not easy, especially when you're working in such a stressful environment. Sometimes things happen so quickly and you just want to point a finger.
Yeah, but I think even in those moments, taking a step back and saying, okay,
yeah,
what happened here?
Yeah.
Let's not focus on who's to blame. Let's focus on how can we prevent this from happening again?
Right.
And, I think a great example of this is a unit that implements, monthly what we learned discussions.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, where they analyze mistakes or near misses, not to point fingers, but to figure out how they can improve their systems.
Right. Yeah.
And prevent those situations from happening again.
I love that it's about improvement, not blame.
Yes.
But even with all of this, I'm guessing it's still not easy to build that true sense of safety.
And that's where the final piece of the LA framework comes in.
Yeah.
Design a culture of respect and psychological safety. What does that actually look like in day-to-day nursing?
So this is where we create a space, where everyone feels valued, respected, and supported both online and offline.
Okay, so how do we translate that into concrete action?
Yeah.
Because it's easy to just say, oh, be respectful.
Exactly.
But how do we actually, make sure that's happening consistently?
Right. I think it starts with setting clear expectations for behavior.
Okay.
Maybe a nursing unit creates a safe communication agreement where they pledge, things like not blaming individuals for mistakes.
Okay.
Encouraging everyone to voice their concerns, practicing active listening, especially, in high-stress situations. It's like a team charter for building respect and psychological safety.
I love that it makes it tangible.
Yes.
It's something you can actually refer back to.
Yeah. And have posted, somewhere visible.
Yeah.
Where everyone can see it.
But I also think respect goes beyond just our immediate teams, right?
Yeah.
What about like the broader nursing community?
Right.
Particularly online.
Yeah, that's a great point because, sometimes things can get a little heated online
Oh, yeah.
and it's easy to, say things that you might not say to someone's face.
And hide behind that screen.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I think it's important to, think about how we can foster that same culture of respect online.
So like what would that look like? Like a professional nursing organization?
Yeah. Huh?
Creating a like code of conduct
Yeah.
for
Yes.
their online forums.
Yeah. So maybe they create a community code of conduct and they outline expectations for respectful and evidence-based discussions.
Mm-hmm.
Make it clear that, diverse opinions are welcome, but, dismissive or rude comments won't be tolerated.
Right. It's setting the tone
Exactly.
right from the start.
Yeah.
This is all starting to come together.
I'm really liking this framework.
Yeah.
It's like you're building a house. You need all these different elements. Exactly.
The foundation of vulnerability.
Yeah.
The framework of communication.
Yes.
The roof of respect.
The roof. Yeah. The foundation.
It all has to
Yeah. It all comes together.
work together.
Yeah. And like building a house, it takes time,
Right.
It takes effort and it takes, a shared commitment to make it happen.
Yeah. You can't just build a house overnight.
Exactly.
So I think some nurses might be listening to this and thinking like, this all sounds amazing, but my workplace doesn't even acknowledge psychological safety.
Yeah.
Like, what
Yeah.
can I do as an individual?
Right.
And I think that's such a valid question, and we're going to dive into that when we come back for part 2. And don't forget, we have a ton of resources available to support you on your journey to building psychological safety. So be sure to visit us at healthcarenurses.net and download the Nurses Link Up app, available on Apple and Google Play.
It's a great way to connect with other nurses, share your experiences, and find support.
We'll see you back here soon for part 2.
Sounds good. Welcome back to part 2 of our deep dive into psychological safety. Before the break, we were talking about how even if your workplace isn't quite there yet on this journey of psychological safety, there's still things you can do as an individual.
Exactly, because not every hospital or clinic is going to be like, oh yeah, we're all in on psychological safety. Let's go. So how can our listeners kind of be the change they want to see in their workplace?
Yeah, and one tool that I found really helpful is something called a psychological safety pledge.
Okay.
And it's basically, a shared statement of commitment to creating that safe environment.
So like a physical piece of paper.
Yeah, it could be a physical piece of paper, or you could even just write it up on a whiteboard or something.
Gotcha.
And you can draft it collaboratively with your team or unit, and kind of come together and say, okay, this is what we all commit to.
So give me an example, like what would some of the things be on this psychological safety pledge?
Yeah. So, it could be something as simple as saying, we commit to fostering an environment where every voice is valued, mistakes are seen as learning opportunities, and feedback is given with care and respect.
I love that.
And, having that written down, maybe even posted somewhere visible,
Right.
can really make a difference.
Because then it's always there. You can always refer back to it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it just kind of sets the tone
Cuts the tone. Yeah.
for the entire team. But then what about those times where you do have to speak up? Especially when it feels risky. Like, what are some tips for our listeners on how to have those tough conversations?
Yeah, I think, one thing that has really helped me is framing things in a way that focuses on patient safety or quality improvement.
Okay.
So instead of saying, I think Dr. So-and-so made a mistake,
Right.
you could say, I'm a little concerned about the latest order for Mrs. Jones. Could we double check to make sure that it's aligned with her care plan?
Oh, that's brilliant, because then it's not about blaming. It's about making sure the patient is getting the best care.
It's about the patient. It's about safety.
Yes.
And, it's not about pointing fingers. It's about, making sure that we're all on the same page and that the patient is safe.
I love that.
And another tip is, data is your friend.
Oh.
So if you're trying to advocate for a change,
Okay.
Implementing those what we learned discussions we talked about,
Right.
come armed with research on the benefits of psychological safety.
So do your homework.
Do your homework, yeah.
Show them the numbers.
Exactly, because let's face it, sometimes administrators need to see the hard evidence.
Right. They want to see the proof.
They want to see the proof before they're willing to make changes.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But even if you can't change the entire system overnight,
Right.
you can still create little pockets of psychological safety within your own team.
Absolutely.
It's like being that ripple
That ripple of change.
of change. Yeah.
Start small. Model those behaviors we've been talking about, vulnerability, open communication,
Yeah.
a focus on learning.
Mm-hmm.
And you might be surprised by how quickly others start to follow your lead.
It's like be the change you want to see in the world.
Exactly.
But in this case, it's be the change you want to see in your workplace.
In your workplace.
Yeah.
And, all of this goes beyond just creating a more pleasant workplace.
Right.
It's about creating a culture of safety where we can all feel empowered to speak up, learn from our mistakes, and ultimately provide the best possible care for our patients.
That's what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
Our patients deserve the best, and we can't give them that if we're operating from a culture of fear and silence.
Right.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I'm feeling so inspired.
Me too.
And I hope our listeners are as well. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
But there's still so much more to explore.
Mm-hmm.
So stay tuned for part 3, where we delve even deeper into these practical applications of the LED framework and how you can use it to really make a difference in your own nursing practice. But before we go, a reminder to visit us at healthcarenurses.net.
Yeah.
You'll find a ton of resources to support you on your journey to building psychological safety,
Absolutely.
including articles, webinars, and a supportive online community.
And don't forget to check out the Nurses Link Up app,
Oh, yeah.
available on both Apple and Google Play.
It's a great way to connect with other nurses,
Mm-hmm.
share your experiences, and find support no matter where you are in your career.
Exactly.
We'll be back soon with more insights and inspiration. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into psychological safety. We've talked about the why, we've talked about the what, but now I really want to dig into the how.
Absolutely. Let's give our listeners some real tangible takeaways, things they can put into practice starting today, no matter where they are in their nursing journey.
Perfect. So where do we start?
Well, let's revisit that idea of leading with vulnerability. We talked about it from a leadership perspective, but it's not just for charge nurses, nurse managers, or anyone with a fancy title.
Right, you can be a leader at the bedside too.
Exactly. So how can a regular staff nurse working their shift embody this idea of vulnerability?
Okay, I like that. So what would that look like, practically speaking?
It's about those small, everyday moments. Think about how you react when you make a mistake. Do you try to brush it under the rug? Or do you own up to it, even if it feels uncomfortable?
Oh, that's so relatable. We've all been there, right? Trying to pretend like something didn't happen, even though everyone probably knows.
Exactly. And the same goes for asking for help. Do you struggle in silence, even if it means risking a mistake or delaying patient care? Or are you comfortable saying, hey, I need a second pair of eyes on this? Or can someone remind me how to do this?
It's about normalizing those moments of not knowing, which can be so hard for nurses because we're expected to have all the answers.
Yeah. But the truth is, nobody have all the answers. And by being willing to admit that, you're actually modeling incredible strength and creating a safer space for everyone.
So leading with vulnerability, check. What about establish inclusive communication norms? Any tips for how our listeners can put this into practice on their units?
Pay attention to who is speaking up in meetings and who is not. If you notice some colleagues are consistently quiet, make a conscious effort to draw them in. You could say something like, hey, Sarah, I haven't heard your thoughts on this yet. What's your perspective?
It's like if you see someone being silent, invite them to speak.
Exactly. And it's not just about inviting them to speak. It's about how you respond. Are you truly listening? Are you validating their ideas, even if you don't completely agree?
So instead of saying, that won't work, you might try, I see what you're getting at. How could we adapt that idea to address these concerns?
Perfect. It's about creating a space where people feel safe to brainstorm, disagree respectfully, and build on each other's ideas.
Yeah. It's shifting the whole dynamic from me versus you to us working together to find the best solution.
Exactly. And remember, communication is more than just words. It's also about nonverbal cues. Are you making eye contact? Are your arms crossed? Are you sending the message that you're genuinely open to hearing what others have to say?
Body language can speak volumes, that's for sure. Okay, so we've covered vulnerability, communication. Let's talk about amplify learning instead of punishment. This feels huge for nursing, where the blame culture can be so ingrained.
It is a big one, but it's about changing the way we talk about mistakes. Instead of focusing on who messed up, we shift the focus to what happened, what we can learn from it, and how we can prevent it from happening again.
It's about asking questions like, what were the contributing factors? Were there any system issues that played a role? What can we put in place to make sure this doesn't happen to another nurse or another patient?
Exactly. And it's about creating a space where people feel safe to ask questions, admit when they don't know something, and seek feedback without fear of judgment.
I'm thinking about new grants again. It can be so intimidating to speak up when you're still learning the ropes.
Absolutely. And that's where a supportive preceptor can make all the difference. Imagine a preceptor saying, I've been a nurse for 10 years and I still make mistakes. It's how we learn and grow. Don't be afraid to ask questions. We're in this together.
That's the kind of preceptor I want to be. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground.
Oh.
Let's talk about the final piece of the LED framework. Design a culture of respect and psychological safety. It feels like this encompasses everything we've been talking about.
It does. It's the umbrella that covers it all. But it's important to remember that psychological safety isn't a one-and-done thing. It's an ongoing process, something you have to actively nurture every single day.
So it's like tending a garden. You have to keep weeding, watering, and nurturing it if you want it to thrive.
I love that analogy. And remember, you don't have to wait for permission to start creating this culture. You can be the seed of change right where you are.
What an inspiring message. This has been such an incredible deep dive into psychological safety. I feel like we've given our listeners a toolkit they can actually use to make a difference, both for themselves and for their patients.
I agree. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. There are so many resources available to support you, including the amazing community here at Healthcare Nurses Network.
Yes. Be sure to visit us at healthcarenurses.net for articles, webinars, and even a supportive online forum where you can connect with other nurses who are passionate about building a more psychologically safe healthcare environment.
And don't forget to download the Nurses Linked Up app, available on Apple and Google Play. It's a fantastic way to connect with other nurses, share experiences, and find support no matter where you are in your career.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into psychological safety. We hope you feel empowered to go out and be the change you want to see in the world of nursing.
Thank you for listening to the Healthcare Nurses Network podcast.